Darkness. In the poem, Darkness, Byron presents a vivid description of the eventual end of the earth and humankind that is caused by the ultimate factor, darkness. Using 82 lines with unbroken line breaks, the poet displays the chaos and destruction caused by the loss of light in the world. Byron achieves his apocalyptic vision to the reader by describing the immediate and indirect reactions from nature, wild animals and humankind in response to the absence of light. To start with, the poet opens the poem with the line, "I had a dream, which was not all a dream," which establishes the setting of the poem. The ambiguity here provides a mixture of reality and illusion. It hints at this poem as a product of the poet's imagination that is influenced by real-life events. Byron directly addresses the main concept of the poem, darkness, by the following line, "The bright sun was extinguished." The sun symbolizes hope and prosperity, and the lack of sunlight suggests the lack of purpose and the loss of hope. The image reinforces the title and the literal dark atmosphere Byron is portraying. As the light source could be seen as the origins of the earth, it is also the first thing to face destruction, truly creating apocalyptic imagery that is defined at the start of the poem. The inability to tell time from the sun also indicates the onset of madness and chaos. The syntactic structure of rayless and pathless occurs throughout the entirety of the poem. The less repetitive adjective structure creates a never-ending, inescapable feeling that prolongs the loss of hope and humanity in the poem. The structure also combines with sibilants to provide a soft and eerie, whispering sound, suggesting an uncanny feeling to the reader. This occurs in the state of the poem from phrases such as, "moonless air," to the midpoint of the poem, "stingless," as well as in the end, with a line full of the pejorative adjectives, seasonless, herbless, treeless, manless, lifeless, enhancing the mood of everlasting silence and death on earth. As the speaker introduces the reader to the effect of darkness on nature and the universe, he then moves on to focus on the human race. Byron presents the initial desperation of humankind by the line, "And men forgot their passions in the dread of this their desolation." With the use of alliteration of consonant, d, the poet emphasizes the men's desolation. Here he makes a direct link with the light being human source of passion and creates a feeling of hopelessness, as it's already established that darkness has taken over the world. Their selfish shows how the only salvation and survival men care about is their own, suggesting how in an apocalypse setting when the basic need of humankind is not satisfied, men would ignore the care for others and solely focus on their personal survival. This is both sympathetic and shows a dejection of humanity and morality. Next, Byron further presents men's despair with the line, "Their funeral piles with fuels." The use of fricative alliteration highlights their act in desperation. It is suggested that the men's desire has turned into anger and madness with the noun, fuel. It highlights humanity's loss of direction because of the loss of light. The poet uses plosive alliteration in the line, "the pall of a past world." Here, the poet highlights the death of the old world where there was a sense of hope. The constant use of fricative, sibilant and plosive alliterations in the poem suggests how the speaker is more focused on sound and auditory imagery rather than visual description due to the inability to see. Byron also focuses on describing the suffering of animals. With the line, "The wild birds shrieked and terrified," the poet presents an unnatural image of the wild animals as their power is removed by darkness. As animals have become fearful and tame, it heightens the desperation as there's nothing that can defend the power of darkness. The poet then moves to something that is much darker and terrifying with the line, "A meal was brought with blood." This suggests that people have to kill each other in order to live, which ultimately leads to cannibalism. Byron shows the gratification and satisfaction from the men, which emphasizes the selfishness of people when it comes to shortage of supply. It conveys chaos in this civilization and how it turns into savagery. The following phrase, "gorging himself in gloom," uses a long vowel sound to suggest a depressing tone. The continuous verb, gorging, connotes a voracious desire and associates humankind with indescribable greediness that leads to the brutal actions of mankind as humanity is lost and completely destroyed. Line 38 introduces the figure of war, which for a moment was no more. Ironically, the widespread despair has led to a cessation of fighting. However, war is able to glut himself on the ensuing bloodshed when mankind turns from political warfare to fighting and killing out of a desire to survive. Every person looks out for his own safety, for no love was left. Here it seems that human nature also is waning. Hints of cannibalism culminate in the image of the dead, whose bones were tombless as their flesh, while the meager by the meager were devoured. For Byron, a lifelong dog lover, the next passage marks the true despair this darkness has wrought upon the world. Even dogs assail their masters, except for one faithful dog who refuses to look for food because to do so would mean abandoning his post, guarding his master's corpse. Finally, this true companion howls in hunger, licks his master's cold hand and dies. Just like the men of action who could not keep themselves or civilization alive, the dog fails in its task, yet nobly does its duty till the end. As Byron envisions the very end of the human world, famine has killed all but 2 men, and they were enemies. It is not clear whether they were enemies beforehand or if they are only enemies now because they must compete for the very last useful resources. These last 2 survivors of a dead world meet by accident at a place where other horrors have been perpetrated, a mass of holy things, for an unholy usage. The blasphemers, who sacrificed morality for a little temporary safety, are now dead. In the small flames, the 2 enemies cooperate, not thinking of themselves as enemies. They are just 2 humans trying to survive. Yet, when they manage to stoke the flames back into existence, they see one another's faces in horror. What they behold leads to pure terror. They saw, and shrieked, and died. The men die not really knowing one another, but only able to see the fiend written upon each other's brow by famine. They see the utter horror of the end and can no longer take it. With the death of the last 2 human beings, what is left is the end of both the natural and the artificial. The earth thus becomes a lump of death, a chaos of hard clay. All waterways stand still, and ships without crew rot upon the sea. All that mankind has achieved has been destroyed or sits putrefying. The poet concludes the poem in the final stanza with the return of the imagery of nature. He personifies darkness with the line, "Darkness had no need of aid from them," suggesting a sense of carelessness and the ease to destroy mankind, which emphasizes the death of all things on earth. The poem ends with the line, "She was the universe." The female pronoun connotes Mother Nature, or Earth, at the same time highlights the female power. The poetic form of this poem is irregular. There are 82 lines written in blank verse that reflects the relentless and rolling feeling that stresses the horror and carelessness of the speaker's fear. The iambic pentameter of the poem also survives through the poem, persisting all the way into the last line. These have not been heroic couplets, however, where one expects rhymes. No, here the poem has all been blank verse, expressing the blackness of its world, unrhymed, the loose ends everywhere as darkness swallows all. In conclusion, Byron reveals his intense and vivid imagery that is filled with both realism and imagination. The poem highlights the poet's concern and fear for the future of humanity if the human race continues to take things for granted. He ultimately suggests that selfishness in the human will eventually cause disaster and the death of the universe, which reflects a pessimistic view that there is no hope for a bright future for humankind. What's waiting for us is the inevitable death that brings the world to an end.